former Huskers turning success in sport to success in business. This is Red to Black.
Hi, this is Tom Osborne. This is how I went from red to black.
Before we get into this episode of Red to Black, we are so excited that Husker football is back. Make sure you catch Big Red Wrap-Up, its game highlights and analysis on NET, Nebraska's PBS and NPR stations. Tuesday nights live at 7 on NET World and on Facebook, and at 10 o'clock on NET. All right, here we go, from red to black.
Coach, thank you very much for taking the time to come in here and talk to us on our podcast. We appreciate that very much.
Glad to do it.
What we want to talk about today is, first of all, talk about what just being associated with the University of Nebraska over the course of your life has meant to you and your family.
Well, first of all, it's been kind of a long journey because I came here in 1962 and was very fortunate in that I left the NFL, came back here in January of 1962, and that was the same month that Bob Devaney came here from Wyoming. And so I went in and saw Bob, and I was going to graduate school, and I thought, I'd kind of like to ease out of athletics, and maybe being a graduate assistant coach would be one way I can do that. So I went in to see him, and Bob said, well, I got plenty of coaches, but he said, I got these guys over in Sully Quadrangle that are causing a lot of trouble. They'd thrown the dorm counselor out, and these were all football players, and he said, I want somebody to move in there with them and kind of ride herd and keep peace among the players. So I did that, and I broke up a few fights and settled things down, and apparently he liked what I did. So when spring ball came, he said, well, maybe we could use you out on the field. And so that's kind of how it all started. I had no plan to be a coach, didn't have any desire to be a coach. But I finished my graduate degrees, and the one thing I couldn't do was turn loose of coaching. And so I stayed here for off and on the next 46 years.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time.
Because everybody in their life has those moments where they look back and they think, man, if I had done this, my life would be here. Or, if I had made this decision, it would be completely different. I know that there was a time that you could have been a Colorado Buffalo coach. Do you ever look back on those times and think, man, thank goodness I didn't? Or, man, that would have been interesting to do something like that, different?
No, I have no regrets about staying here. And really that was a little bit of a desperate move because, as you know, maybe you don't know, the first 5 years that I was a coach here, we won a lot of games, but those 5 years we didn't beat Oklahoma. And it kind of came down to a one-game season. So if you didn't beat Oklahoma, it was a failure. And so there was a fair amount of angst among the fans. And we felt, well, Colorado, you got the mountains and maybe be a little easier recruiting. And so I went out and took a look at it. I had talked to my coaches. I was going to take them all with me if they win. They thought, yeah, you better take a look at it. So I went out there, but on the way back, I got thinking. I said, I recruited these guys to Nebraska, and I told them this was a great place. And how am I going to stand up in front of them and tell them that I recruited you here, but I'm going somewhere else? I said, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so I said, this is it. I'm going to live or die with Nebraska. I'm not, and if we don't beat Oklahoma pretty soon, probably going to get fired. But
probably going to be more on the dying side than the living side, right?
But fortunately, in 1978, they really had a good team. They were, I think, maybe the best team in the country. They came up here and we knocked the ball loose a few times, and Jeff Hansen knocked the ball out of Billy Sims' hands at the 3-yard line. Jim Pillen fell on it, and we ran out the clock to win the game 17-14. And that kind of turned things around. People began to think, well, maybe the guy's okay, and they were not real sure, but they thought, well, maybe this will work out. And then we had some years where we won some conference championships and had some pretty good seasons, and probably should have won a national championship in 1983, but we didn't. Could have won a championship in 82, but didn't. We were 12-1, 13-1 both those years. And then things kind of stabilized and had a good coaching staff. Recruiting went well, and So we finished out fairly good.
There's a lot to be said about talent on a football team, but there's also a lot to be said about building a culture of winning and camaraderie on that team. How did you go about building a culture of, because everybody we've spoke to that played for you said that you built a culture of winning and hard work and dedication. How did you go about building that with those teams?
Well, it certainly wasn't a one-person project. We started something called the Unity Council, which was a good idea. Actually, Jack Stark, who was a sports psychologist, came up with the idea. And so we had the players select 2 players from each position, 2 defensive linemen, 2 offensive linemen, 2 running backs, on and on. So we had 16 guys. And they met every Tuesday night. And there were no coaches in the room, and only Boyd Epley, the strength coach. And Boyd was kind of non-threatening because he didn't control playing time. And we said, your charge is to bring up everything that you see that's getting in the way of team unity and unity of purpose. And so there'd be stuff like, well, we didn't like what we had for lunch on Friday, or we didn't like the movie we saw before we played Missouri, or things that they would never come in and talk to me about. You know. And so I was able to address those things on Wednesday in the team meeting. And so I was kind of putting out little brush fires. But above all, the players realized they were being listened to. They were being heard, and that they had a voice. And these were people that were elected by them. They weren't chosen by the coaches. And so they were their representatives. And so, in a sense, we were listening to them, and we were hearing the things that were going on that they saw that I had no way of knowing about. And I think that was important. And then part of the charge that we also gave them, we said, you know, we'd like to have a disciplinary code. We'd like to have your input, because so often maybe I would dismiss a player from the team for some activity, and then another player would be run up the stadium steps for the same activity. But what the players wouldn't know was that I told the player, I said, no, this is the 3rd time, and I can't keep giving you 2nd and 3rd chances. And if there's any more trouble, I'm going to have to dismiss you. And the other guy, maybe it's the first time it ever happened, and so they didn't know who was continually messing up and what they had done. And so the Unity Council was established. And we had a point system, and so every time a player missed a class, that was a lost point. If a player was late to practice, this was 2 points. Player didn't follow instructions, that was a point. And anytime you got to 5 points, you didn't play. We held you out of game. And if you had enough points, you were dismissed from the team. And if you did everything right, had a perfect week, you got a point back. And so when a player got to 3 points, he had to appear before the Unity Council. And the Unity Council was pretty rough on those guys.
I can imagine, yeah.
There were no punches pulled. And so the players knew who was goofing up and who was continually a problem and who wasn't. And they really took matters in their own hands, and they straightened a lot of things out. And there were things I don't think I even knew about, where they went to a guy and said, look, you stop doing this or we're going to take care of it. And so I think that some of the unity of purpose and some of the discipline certainly came from coaches, but also came from the players. And I think over time the players developed a sense of ownership where they had a tremendous amount of pride in the team, and they weren't going to let anybody interfere with that. And as a result, I think that the culture got very strong to where the success of the team for most players was more important than personal success. And that's pretty hard to do with young guys to get them to where their own personal goals are secondary to the welfare of the group. And so it was a confluence of things. That was part of it. Part of it, we were a little lucky in recruiting. We had some good players that came in here at the same time. And we had continuity in our coaching staff where if we lined up in the first series and somebody had a defense that we hadn't seen on film, we could say, well, we saw this 3 years ago when we played Kansas. And so there was a lot of institutional knowledge that we could draw on and a lot of communication that was pretty quick because we didn't have 3 or 4 coaches coming and going every year. And so a lot of those things worked together.
And, from when you had said setting an example like you did about you keeping your word. I mean, to me, that's just such a baseline value to have, is just keeping your word. And the fact that you showed that to the guys back when you first started. And that was something that I think that helps people when you build a culture, because it's not like you can't go buy a culture. It's an intangible thing. But when they know the person that they're fighting for and the person that's running it is true to their word and they're honest, it's really easy to get behind that person and fall in line and really fight for them.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about integrity is that it builds trust, and you can't have a good organization without a high degree of trust. And so when we recruited a player, we never promised them anything. Quite often, even though somebody maybe doesn't offer them cars or clothes or cash, they'll say, well, you're so good, you're going to start as a freshman. Or you're going to be on the travel squad as a freshman. Or we're going to make you the Heisman Trophy winner. And John Wooden, the basketball coach, said something that makes a lot of sense. He said, never make a promise you can't keep. And so a lot of that recruiting talk didn't ring true with players. And so they often mentioned, there was a book written by Mike Babcock, and it was called The Heart of a Husker. And he interviewed, I think, 38 players that had played over various time periods. And they continually said that we felt cared for. And then one thing that was important was they said, when we heard a lot of promises from other schools that certain things would happen, and somehow it just wasn't very authentic, and we knew this was recruiting talk, and Nebraska never promised us anything. And we felt that we could trust them. Now, we lost some players because we didn't make those promises, but I think for the most part, we lost the right ones, and for the most part, the right ones came. And then I think the other thing that was important when you talk about culture was the walk-ons, because I don't think most players really could identify who the walk-ons were and who the scholarship players were, because they were all treated the same. And every year we would save 3 or 4 scholarships just for walk-ons. And it's always tempting when you get down toward the end, you can get this guy with a scholarship. But we said no, because the best investment we made was with guys who had already proven themselves. I mean, these guys were already first or second team players, and so we gave them, we cut down the number of offers we made, and we had 3 or 4 scholarships every year for those guys. And so the walk-ons were important because almost by definition they were overachievers. They were guys who would work harder, make a greater sacrifice, often had a great sense of integrity, and really a great sense of loyalty. And over time, about half our team were walk-ons. And so I talked 1 or 2 times to some guys who were highly recruited players, and I guess now would be 4-star, 5-star recruits. We didn't have the stars in those days. And they said, the thing that really impacted us was we came here thinking maybe we could get to the NFL because this was a high-profile program. But we saw how hard the walk-ons worked and the sacrifices they were willing to make. And pretty soon their attitude and the things that they would do, be on the scout team for maybe 3 years, began to rub off on all of us. And we began to buy into the idea that really was important that we sacrifice our own personal desires for the welfare of the whole thing. And so the walk-ons were a big part of it. And it wasn't just their physical ability and the fact that many of them turned into great players, but it was more the attitude, the culture, the work ethic that they brought to the whole thing.
Well, I think that I didn't play football at all, except for 2 weeks in junior high, and I was not very good. I would not have been on your radar. I was a 0 star. But that, not just rubbing off from the walk-ons to the other players, but that attitude, speaking of somebody who grew up in the state, it rubbed off on everybody in the state. I don't know if anybody that's not from Nebraska, if that's like that in other states, but just so you know that attitude that you brought to the team, because like you said, it was a successful team, but we were proud of it no matter what, and that rubbed off on all of us in the state that grew up here. So thank you for that, because I think it gave our state, people look at our state different. We're just different. Nebraska's just different. I think that has a lot to do with this. You built a culture on a football team, but you also built a culture, helped build a culture in a state too.
Well, I think if you think about it, I've been in most every town in Nebraska, often multiple times. Just because I'm old, but most every little town in the state at one point or another had a player or maybe several players who played here, and those towns were proud of those guys, and so it did. I think the walk-on program had a lot to do with unifying the state. And, of course, we were very fortunate in that we were the only major Division I football program in the state, too, because there wasn't an Iowa State rivalry and that type thing. So as a result, over the years, I think Nebraskans identified with Nebraska football pretty heavily.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it was a big deal. We talked to Matt Verzal last week, so my dad was a dean out at Mid Plains in North Platte. Mm-hmm. And so every year he'd do the School is Cool Jam. And so like you and like Brooke Behringer came and he dunked in front of all these kids. So being able to reach out to all of these small towns and inspire these, young men and women to, hey, you can be a champion, but these are the values that we live by. We're accountable to each other. And this is how you build a championship future. And I think that was really important back in those days to inspire young kids, especially, little kids out in North Platte.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the school, this cool stuff. And it was kind of fun to go around to a lot of the towns in the state. I wasn't able to go multitude of places, but every year we'd go to 4, 5, 6, 7 places. And of course, the players went to more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good.
So we want to talk about teammates here in a second. I just want to ask you a question. When you're sitting by yourself in your den or out on your deck, what are the things that you think about? Like as far as memories from when you were coaching, or when you were in Washington, when you were coaching, was it athletic director? What are the things that you tend to think about more than others?
Well, right now I'm focused on teammates primarily, and that relates back to my years in coaching, because back in the early 60s when we went out to recruit, very seldom ran across a young man that wasn't growing up under the same roof with both biological parents. But as time went on, that began to change, and saw a lot more kids who didn't have dads, were from single-parent families. And so 1991, we decided, well, we'll take a shot at it, see if we can do something about it. And so I asked football players one day in a team meeting, I said, how many of you guys would be willing to serve as a mentor to 7th or 8th grade boys in Lincoln here? And 22 hands went up. So we went to the Lincoln Public Schools. We said, would you like to have some football players serve as mentors to these young people? And you pick the kids. And so they did, and so it played itself out, and these kids got to be seniors, and we were pleased that of the 22 young people, 21 graduated on time, and the one who didn't was riding on a motocross circuit. He was riding dirt bikes all around the country, and he did graduate, but he was making some money. But the thing that really surprised us was of the 22, 18 went on to college. And,
oh, wow, that's great.
We raised some money to provide scholarships for them, and so a lot of those kids did really well. So we expanded the program, first here in Lincoln and then across the state. And so today we're in 5 states, and last year we mentored 11,000 kids.
Wow.
And the graduation rate from those kids was 96%.
That's incredible.
And when you figure that awful lot of them are living below the poverty line or single-parent situations, you would normally expect probably a 75-80% graduation rate. So anyway, we've learned a lot, school-based, one day a week, and it usually is over the lunch period, maybe a 30, 40-minute lunch period. But now with the COVID issues, we're having to do online, so some of the mentoring as occurs is virtual. It's Zoom or some other app, and but a lot of it's still in person. And we'd like to hit 12,000 here this next year if we can. So it's grown a lot, 175 school districts, and so we think it really has made a difference in the lives of a lot of kids.
So we've heard you speak before, and a word that I've heard you use is trajectory, and that is changing the trajectory of a young person who might be headed towards some bad behavior or a future that they might not envision for themselves. Talk a little bit about how you've changed trajectories in young people's lives, your teammates.
Well, I can give you kind of some broad statistics. We follow our matches and we gather data, and we find that in about 80-85% of our matches that attendance improves. So when school attendance improves, then grades get better, graduation rates improve, percentage of kids going on to college improves. And we think that's important. We also find that in about 80-85% of our matches, that behavior improves. There's less classroom disruption, less substance abuse, less teenage pregnancy, gang membership, and on and on. And I think most people would say that's good. And then we also found that almost all of our kids are more hopeful. And hope is a very powerful thing because so many kids grow up without much hope for the future. And if you have hope, then there's something out there that's going to help pull you on through. And what a mentor can do is provide a vision of what's possible. And so we try to build on strengths. Most everyone has some things that they do better than most other people. And so we identify strengths and we build on those strengths. And academic majors that are built on strengths, the things that you do better, that you do well. It may be auto mechanics, it may be something to do with science, it may be mathematics, whatever. You're going to do a lot better in school, and you're going to do a lot better in college if you're doing something that fits the particular strengths that you have in your life. So we try to do that as much as we can. And so anyway, we as I said, over the last 28 years, we've learned a lot, and I think we're doing a lot better.
Thank you for just everything that you've done for our state and for kids all over the country, not just in our state, but like Chris was talking about the trajectory. You've changed a lot of trajectories for kids, and it's pretty awesome. And we're proud to have you as part of our family. Really,
I appreciate it. Yeah, and just kind of as a shameless appeal, we always need more mentors, and says we have probably a third more kids who want a mentor than we have mentors.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody listening, just go to teammates.org and we'll plug you in, and we can really use your help.
Absolutely. And we'll get that tagged on the episode and put out on everything that we do. So,
yeah.
Coach, thank you for taking the time today. We appreciate it. And thanks for everything.
Yeah, glad to do it.
Thanks.
We are so excited that Husker football is back. Make sure you catch Big Red Wrap-Up. It's game highlights and analysis on NET, Nebraska's PBS and NPR stations. Tuesday nights live at 7 on NET World and on Facebook, and at 10 o'clock on NET.
A Hurrdat Media Production.